Islam and Hinduism have had a history marked with conflict throughout their time together in India. Islam first entered India from Afghanistan and set up rule in 1206 AD. From this time, there was roughly 5 centuries of Islamic rule. Muslim attitudes and approaches to Hinduism varied depending upon the ruler at the time. Some gave freedoms and encouraged toleration of different religious beliefs and even promoted religious blending. However, others destroyed Hindu temples and forced Hindus to convert to Islam or die. The conflicts, of course, rose from the strong differences between Islam and Hindu beliefs, namely the number of gods there are. Islam believing one God versus Hinduism believing in many, many gods, which actually comprise a system in which everything is God. It's very complicated. And, of course, not everyone had to be forced to convert. The lower caste, of course, were very attracted to Islam. It's very good for them to be able to jump ship to Islam and escape some of the societal trappings that came along being born into a lower caste. Others also appreciated Islamic literature and art and architecture and were attracted to that as well. So it wasn't always forced conversion. Sometimes there were some peaceful exchanges and movements from one to the other. A sign of Islamic rule in India that some people forget about today is the Taj Mahal. It was actually built by the Muslim rulers within India. Influence also came from Europeans into India in the 1500s as Europeans began to move in and take control of some of the ports and other regions of Europe. Of course, the most influence from Europe came from Great Britain, from which they had 2 centuries of control over most of the subcontinent. Religiously, the English had few Christian converts, but had great influence in changing or challenging traditional Hindu practices such as the caste system and untouchability, child marriages, polytheism, and the role of women in society and marriage. One of the greatest changes, however, was the illegalization of sati. In sati, a woman whose husband died is burned alive on her husband's funeral pyre. The British thought this practice was completely barbaric and led to the illegalization of it. If you look online, you can find instances where people have reported that it still occurs today in India from time to time, but this practice probably was never too widespread, but it still was a practice that occurred and maybe still occurs from time to time within India. Many Indians advocated violence as a response to British domination. Enter Mohandas Gandhi. Gandhi learned non-violence from Jainism. That was the religion that he was brought up into, Jainism. Probably the religion that advocates for non-violence and harming nothing the most out of any religion in the world. Gandhi went to London at age 19 in 1888 to study law. There, he became familiar with the teachings of Jesus. In particular, he was attracted to Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, found in Matthew chapters 5 through 7. It's where Jesus talks highly of love your enemy and don't pay back evil with evil. If someone slaps you on the cheek, turn your cheek. Someone needs a coat, give them your coat. Just very nonviolent, loving, peaceful sort of qualities that Jesus advocated that all men should practice. In this time, he also was introduced to the Bhagavad Gita for the first time, a Hindu text. From the Bhagavad Gita, he was really attracted to the idea of an active but selfless human being. 1891, Gandhi returned to India, but soon went to South Africa to practice law. There he experienced inequality in code written to benefit Europeans, and he led marches and advocated against this for quite a while and gained a good ideology of how to counter oppression in a nonviolent way. In 1915, he returned to India and dedicated his life to liberating India from British rule. He led marches, hunger strikes, talks, He's very well known for the Salt March of 1930. Salt was monopolized by the British and was highly taxed, and Gandhi led a march to the ocean shores of India and collected salt from the salt waters there on the shore. And a lot of other people followed him in this process, thus getting salt untaxed, which led to a lot of them being jailed. This whole liberation movement that Gandhi was leading, really came to play with India being set free from British rule in 1947. Britain just couldn't handle the movement as well as handling World War II at that time. So in 1947, Britain was set free. At this time, Gandhi advocated for religious tolerance within independent India. However, it was a no-go because of conflicts that arose between the Muslims and the Hindus. The Muslims feared violence and oppression from the Hindu majority, and thus Pakistan was formed on the northern border. Most of the Muslims in India lived in the north, so this division occurred, Pakistan and India, and they've already had 2 wars since India's liberation in 1947, and a third one, of course, is looming today. Women in India today, this is focusing on modern times in India. Women are able to take on more roles, get an education, learn to read and write, as they weren't initially allowed to do that. They were just supposed to essentially treat their husbands as a god and serve them as their gods. Very unlike what we're accustomed to today. Today, though, women are getting more freedoms and they're able to take on more roles in society. However, the majority of the women are still limited to certain roles, such as nurses and teaching. So not quite as free in society as what we may be accustomed to in the West. However, that's not to say all women are that case. A lot of women get upper degrees in education and take on a lot of roles in society that, or years ago would have been only for men. The caste system is also weakening in India today as well, and untouchability has been outlawed, although it still exists in the countrysides. Hindu influence beyond India. So now looking at how Hinduism has had influence outside of India. First big movement of Hindu influence outside of India occurred with the Transcendental writers in the 1800s. This would be Thoreau and Whitman and Emerson and some others along that Transcendental movement. They were all influenced by Hinduism and actually quote the Bhagavad Gita and mention the Bhagavad Gita in their writings and talk about Brahman. They use all terms of Hinduism and really focus on the sacredness of nature and being one of nature and finding peace within nature and just the interconnectedness of all things. Definitely from Hinduism, we can see this concept of nature being something worthy of worship and protection and praise. Actual Hindus teaching Hinduism came in 1893 to America. It was the first World Parliament of Religions held in Chicago. Swami Vivekananda spoke at it. Here you see the newspaper clipping of this taking place. Other Hindu teachers and gurus came in a flood during this time behind, also establishing little communities to teach Hinduism. In the 60s, you get a big boom with the hippie movement, in particular with the Beatles. There you see George Harrison learning to play a sitar. And George Harrison actually became a Hare Krishna, and the song that he wrote once the Beatles broke up, My Sweet Lord, was actually dedicated to the Hindu god Krishna. Actually, Krishna is an avatar of the Hindu god Vishnu, but he sings to Krishna in the song My Sweet Lord. Of course, other influences, yoga is a very common one, being practiced now in the West, and oftentimes the clubs and teachers that practice it incorporate the spiritual elements of Hinduism and even sometimes Hindu teachings into the yoga. So it's not completely just stretching. even as it's practiced here in the West now. Vegetarianism is definitely on the rise. That can be linked to the influence of Hinduism within the 60s countercultural movement, and how Hindus value all things, and because all things are divine, and so linked to that, Hindus don't eat meat, and that's an aspect of what's happening now in Western culture, this movement towards vegetarianism, and if it's not vegetarianism, a movement towards animal rights and protection. A lot of that can probably be linked to Hinduism's influence on 60s counterculture. Also, another big influence is this idea of all religions lead to God, and that can be linked to the Hindu teaching and influence of all things being interconnected and ultimately one. So I do think that teaching of all things, or all religions, or aspects of a greater whole, can be linked to Hindu influence. Another interesting one, people look at the teachings of Jesus and Vishnu and claim that they have the same teachings. I even met a Hare Krishna lady who told me that they in fact were the same person. Can leave you on that as a discussion question. What do you think? You see a link there for religioustorlerance.org. They have a great article on that, showing people who try to show, people who illustrate Jesus' teachings and Vishnu's teachings, and how they were similar and how their lives are parallel to each other, and basically kind of make an argument that they were one and the same, like Jesus was a repeat or an avatar of Vishnu. It's very interesting stuff as they compare Vishnu and Jesus and Krishna. So take a look at that. That page also has the rebuttals listed, but I'm sure you can come up with your own rebuttals to that argument. Another great discussion question to leave you with then is, how else do you see Hindu influence within Western culture, within our movies, within our music, within our ideology? How has it come up? How do you see it? And how can you now begin to recognize these Hindu elements within Western culture, to pull them out and to show how they're contrary and contradictory to the Word of God found within the Christian Bible?